Hi, and welcome to Dip In and Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. I am sitting down this morning with Rachael Lemon. Rachael, like so many of the professionals that I chat to, has a variety of roles, does so many different things, and it's usually best to leave it to the professional to explain what they do. So over to you, Rachael. Good morning.
Hi, Lucy. Thanks for having me. In short, so my background's in healthcare. So I've got over 30 years experience working in healthcare, pharmacy. I was trying to add it up, over 20 years in national leadership. So working with professional leadership bodies and then with Department of Health and NHS England, different through that. And so through my career, obviously part of as you evolve through healthcare is mentorship and training and teaching students. You've got every year, every intake, you've got new people. Yeah. So I also got the short straw. No one in my department wanted to do the teaching qualification. And my other co-managers at the time nominated me. So I did that. And actually it turned out to be quite a blessing because obviously, like I said, teacher's part of your role anyway, but it meant then when I was in the situation of not having a job, I straight away went into tutoring and stuff full time. So I'm working for myself as well. So there was kind of like a whole new world outside of the NHS. And it was good because you're still doing what you love and able to impact on patients because you're bringing through the next generation of people that are out on the face of it with patients and delivering care. So yeah, it was really it was good. I think I always say that sometimes the things that you think are the worst things turn out to be the best things. Like even if something feels rubbish at the time, actually take the opportunities and unless it's really, really painful, just go for it because like I said, it was huge for me being able to move on because I had that extra qualification that I could take anywhere with a laptop rather than being stuck to a place of employment. So I've kind of evolved a bit. So since I left my abusive relationship, I have obviously I moved away with nothing, started again, which many people have to do. So I had like my car, my dog and my laptop and a little flight case, which normally wouldn't even do me for one night, but that was what I went with.
That's the reality, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's what I went with. So that having my laptop obviously meant I could work, and I was delivering training online mostly, but it meant I still had a job because and prior to that, I'd actually lost my job. I was the word let go, dismissed, but I'd had sickness issues, I think, which were related to my abuse and trauma. They're definitely exacerbated by it. So my sickness absence. So I lost my job of many years because I had a new manager came in. It was her. They aren't actually. I think it's notorious, isn't it, for women bullying women in organisations. There was no sort of compassion there, let's say. And actually, what people don't realise is that actually when you're in an abusive relationship, that work is often your only safe place. Like when I lost my job, we'll say lost my job because obviously there's a lot more to it that I'm not allowed to speak about, but when I lost my job, I lost my safe place. And I lost my identity in terms of I was good at my job. So like when you're at home with an abuser and nothing's good enough and they're always,
putting you down and
you're living with that constant, being told you're not enough or whatever it is you're told. So when you're at work and that's your career, your passion, that's where you thrive. So that is it's as well as your safe place, it's the one place you can be yourself. So when you lose that and then you end up spending more time with your abusers, you're at home all the time and become more isolated. I think that's when things really like compound and really you kind of maybe the enormity of the situation you're in hits home, because when you've got somewhere safe to go, you have got that period of time throughout the day
You can just
where,
think, I'm out of it. Even
yeah,
if you're not out of it in your head, you're out of it physically.
yeah, and in healthcare, you know, in my job, I wasn't like I got to work and then you're the work, Rachel. Not that they're two different people, but you know, I was a professional.
Yeah.
I was managing a team of people, and yeah, you know, I didn't go to work to talk about my problems. I was dealing with patients who had, you know, far bigger problems and things like that. So it wasn't, yeah, it was just that safe space. And I think as well, from a management point of view, I was supporting people who were going through abuse, and I was always at them, and you know, and there was a part of me that was like, this is me as well.
Alarm bells going off. Yeah.
But as a manager, a senior manager, leader, whatever you want to call it, within the organisation, you know, it would have undermined my position to have confided in someone that I worked with that
which you shouldn't do.
But this was my life at home. You know, people might not have, well, there would been lots of staff that wouldn't have respected me if I was like, well, at home, you know, I can't even wash up properly because you know, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, you know, I'm not. So all of those things, you know, and that living on eggshells, etc.
Yeah,
you know, people just wouldn't. You would lose that kind of autonomy and that kind of, you know, the respect.
Putting on a mask almost for work, isn't it? So you're having to look after other people in the role that you do. It's something that's so important, and the role that you did, you know, but then not being able to actually process anything yourself, just having to keep it all, you know.
Yeah, and I think in leadership for women anyway, it's quite a lonely, it could be quite lonely anyway, can't it? So, you know, like in pharmacy in particular, probably like 80% of the workforce, something like that, is women.
Yeah.
But in the leadership roles within healthcare itself, probably like, I think they say 25% overall in healthcare globally, and that includes management roles are women, but only 13% of CEOs. So you can imagine in a department of say like 100 people, you've got so many female managers, but actually like the top leadership roles are generally male. So again, if you're in a woman in an abusive relationship, you're not really going to confide in your male boss that at home this is what happens. So you haven't really got anyone to go to, and so you've either got home or work. And you haven't, you know yourself, you know, you become isolated because they make it horrible. You know, I wasn't allowed to have people to the house, or if anyone ever did come to the house, he would make it so uncomfortable that they never came back. So I never had friends that came to my house. And I suppose I never really had friends because I had people that I worked with. I had a couple that were friends, you know, worked there for a long time, but that were actually friends, you know. If we took work away, was there still a relationship? And that was really quite apparent after losing my job that
they were there.
It was a work relationship, not a genuine friendship.
And
they weren't there as well, you know, there's the stigma that people don't know what to say, so they feel uncomfortable. So when you actually sort of get that first moment when you do tell people what happened, and I remember I kind of wrote a small group message and said I've had to leave, because I just had to leave sort of overnight, kind of, you know. So there was no going back, there was no going to say goodbye to the people that I did care about. And so I kind of had a little group chat, sent a little message, and it was just a short version of like, this is what's been happening for the last 17 years, and you know, I've got to go, kind of thing. And most of the people, you know, only a couple of those people are still in touch with me, and you know, professionally as well. So as well as working in a local hospital, I did a lot of national work. So you know, country, and you know, many of those people that I'd worked with for years and considered friends, like especially some of the males, like just never spoke to me again. You know, literally, and they still haven't to this day. So, you know, and I think it takes a lot of courage, doesn't it, to admit to people that you were in an abusive relationship, and that
huge amount.
The person that they know, who's like, you know, good at their job, is good at their profession, is passionate, and you know, can stand up and speak in front of people, that the person they know is actually at home is too scared to speak.
Behind closed doors is a totally different world that you're living in.
Too scared to breathe too loud, you know, because of the consequences of that. So and so I think rather than having conversations or anything, people just literally cut you dead. So, and I think to a certain extent, a part of that for me was, it was a big learning curve, because actually, to a certain extent, I was more disappointed in my friends, family, and people that treated me in that way than I was in the person that had been abusing me for years, because I knew what the benchmark was with him. That was so what true. He did. But to then find healthcare professionals as well, like people that were supposed to be caring by default, had no compassion and empathy, or it was just too uncomfortable to talk about, not very
that's so true.
I did, like, for me, rationally, like my ex-partner, he did the things he did, but I kind of felt more, I guess at the time, more hurt by the people that I thought were going to be there for me, who weren't, or that even worse, judged me. And we had this conversation before. Well, why didn't you just leave if it was that bad? I mean, God, if I had £1 million for every time or even a penny for how many times that conversation has happened,
comes up, And do you find
this mansion now and
you'd be quizzing. The one thing I always notice as well, and I think, I don't know, I may have written a blog about it recently, or maybe one that's still floating around my head, is when, more often than not, like you said, you're 100% right, and nobody else really has touched on this, about how, how hurt and how devastated you feel that the people that are closest to you, that are supposed to be the ones that are your support network, are actually the ones that you can't confide in and you can't rely on. And one thing I notice very much is, in the beginning, the support, I don't know if this is the same, but the support sometimes starts off very strong. We've got your back, we're behind you. But what a lot of people don't realize, and that's your family and friends and work colleagues included, is this isn't, I think I have written this blog actually, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. The process in abuse afterwards, it isn't something that you're just going to snap out of and everything's going to be fine and you're going to, skip down the road and everything's fine and dandy. It is a process that can take you the rest of your life for a lot of people. It's something you manage daily. And I think what family and friends don't appreciate is, this isn't something that you're all of a sudden, like the end of a film, going to go, it's all sorted. And they find that really hard, I think, because I don't think they can grasp in their own minds how to continue that level of support, not for weeks, not for months, for years, for decades. And I think that's the hardest thing, isn't it, for victims, survivors, whatever anybody wants to call themselves, is you need that consistency of people being there for you. And when they can't, you do sort of internalize a lot, because you think, well, who else can I rely on but myself? And I think you're so right. It's so hard, because those are the people you want to rely on, and you feel hurt by it, because they don't understand. They don't understand the magnitude of actually what has happened to you.
And I think it's really hard, isn't it? So, like, the person I'm closest to in the world is my dad, and I can talk to my dad about anything, but with my dad, I choose not to tell him everything, because it will break his heart. And I know, like, so my dad's got 4 daughters, I'm the oldest, and he would, he feels our pain.
Absolutely.
And so for me, I felt like, obviously I told him that I've been in an abusive relationship, but I've never really told him all the details, because we can't change what's happened. And that will just hurt him, because he will be beating himself up, going, I should have noticed, I should have done this, I should have, could have, whatever. No one can do that. We haven't, hindsight's great, but in reality, it's not going to change anything. So I made a conscious decision not to tell my dad everything that happened. He knew that I had to leave because I wasn't safe, so he had an idea, but he didn't need to know all the gory details. And so so that was my one person who I could always talk to. I didn't talk to, because I didn't hurt him, and that was my choice. And so then the other people around me, so like my sister, for example, one of my sisters, she was just like, literally after a week, well, you're not there anymore now, you can just be happy and live happily ever after, like a princess thing. Watch too many Disney movies, I think, because and I try to explain it again, like that first year when you leave is the most dangerous year of your life.
Absolutely.
No one prepares you for that.
No.
You know, even you, it's kind of like you have the day you leave, and then the day after there's this kind of like, oh, I'm free. And then there's this big like smack in the face that like, no, you're not free.
No. You're not going to get away that easily.
Yeah,
No.
oh, absolutely not. So you have a fleeting moment of like, wow, is this the first day of the rest of my life? Which it is, but that first day,
That euphoria is taken away. Yeah,
because
absolutely.
you don't know what to do with yourself, do you? It's like my relationship was 17 years, so you know it's a long time, and I never ever believed. I don't even think I dared to hope that I would have a life outside of that. And so that kind of first day, it was like, oh, I can go and do things that I want to do. I can, but then obviously, then they step up with because when someone who's a narcissist loses control of you, then they step it up to a whole new level that you can't have ever imagined. You know, like 300 messages, one after the other. You know, like when are you coming home? When are you coming home? Starting off nice, I love you, I miss you. Then by the end of it, I'm going to kill you. You know, and that was daily, constantly, and that's messages, emails. You know, he hacked my emails, all things that you just don't even think about. So it was almost like he was still there because he
controlling your day-to-day life.
He had access to everything, you know, and things that I didn't even think about, you know, he had. So like when I left, I didn't have my passport, I didn't have my birth certificate, I didn't have anything, my driving license, I had none of those things. He'd kept them all in a drawer, and I had none of those things that I could then again use to start again, because you need all those things, you need ID.
And then they'll hold them to ransom, and
so I couldn't get them back. I couldn't go back to the house, you know. It wasn't safe for me to ever go back to the house that I owned to get my stuff. It wasn't that, it just wasn't happening. So then having to try and get a birth certificate when you're in your 40s, like trying to get a new passport without any ID, all of that stuff is like, it's just stuff, isn't it? Constant stuff that you're trying to do, like going to the bank, making sure that your name is taken off of any joint accounts, any you know, that your new address is not shown on any documentation or any credit searches or anything, that there's no way for them to find you. And
that's you doing it all. That's the sad thing, isn't it? You know, the system and society in itself should be geared up for these situations, and it's not. You're having to think outside the box. You're having to think of all the what ifs and maybes, and that's what's scary. I know things are changing, and I know a lot of you know the banks and different organizations are trying to think in terms of domestic abuse, but you know, for you to go through that and have to think constantly, okay, well, how am I going to do this without this? How am I going to get my passport? I mean, that adds to the trauma and the stress massively.
It's kind of like you're in another limbo for a year, aren't you? So like there's the house had to be sold, he was in it, he wouldn't move, he trashed it, he had a girl living in there who had red hair. He was, you know, the police called me one day and they were like, where are you? And this girl apparently had there was a call from the neighbour, and there was a girl who was unconscious on the floor that they thought was dead. And when the police and the paramedics and the fire, I'm not sure why the fire, but the fire service had gone to the house, they couldn't get in. So they rang my mum to see if that dead body or the body was me. And then when they found out it wasn't me, they weren't allowed to tell me anymore. So I didn't know if there was like a dead person in the house that I was paying the mortgage for, you know, because that's what things like that, you know. So like constantly always being still on in fear, like will he know where I am? You know, he said he's going to kill me, he said he's going to find me, like will he find me? And people were like, oh, people just, you know, that's people just say that, but actually when you've been in a situation where you know they can and they will, you know. And I think that's a difference, because it's like, you know, we're both educated, you know, so, you know, I know the difference between like anxiety, you know, like it might happen, and I know the difference between reality of what could happen. And people struggle to understand that. They're just like, oh, it's all in your head. But when something's actually happened to you, you know that it can happen again. So that anxiety is based on like an actual genuine fear
on facts.
And I class myself as having a high EQ. You know, I'm very good at myself at saying, right, okay, what's real in this situation? So if I'm having a panic attack, right, okay, what's actually real right now? What is just because you're remembering something that happened to you? You know, I'm really good at that myself. You know, I'm very aware but there are things that have happened and we know that could happen.
Yeah.
And those are real. Yeah.
And you live with that every day. That's the sad thing is, and again, that's what people don't get is it is that living with it constantly. And the worst part is when you're made to feel like you're being dramatic, you know, you're being over the top. That's never going to, like you say, that's never going to happen. You've lived with that person for a very long time. And as much as they think they know you inside out, you are also very aware by this point when you are starting to kind of come out of the fog, if you like, whatever, and you realize what you've been going through and what you're still going through. And you know what they are capable of more than anybody else knows what they're capable of. And other people might think you're insane and go, oh no, they'd never do that. But you know that person, you've lived with it. You've seen, you know, the whites of their eyes when they're, you know, not in a good place.
Good looking, you know, it was good looking. You know, so that's another, you know, like people, oh, but they're so good looking.
Oh, charming, you know, was disarming. Ugh.
Yeah, but you know, that would be another thing. Oh no, they look. Oh, they're too good looking. Oh, they're too nice to do that. Oh, you must be making
Exactly.
it up.
So you're good looking, therefore you can't be a complete.
Yeah. So like, there's so many like misconceptions and like, oh, and again, all of the stigma. I mean, like you said, it's getting a little bit better now because more women and men are talking about it. But we're still made to feel like that we're less of a person. So like in a professional capacity, talking out about it, you know, can discredit you. You know, some people will be like, you know, that person's can't be good at their job. If they let that happen to them at home, then they can't be a great professional at whatever profession you're in, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's that stigma, isn't there? Like, you let it happen to you. Victim
blaming, absolutely.
Yeah, but so people are of the opinion that if you let that happen to you, then
it's your own fault.
But also that you can't possibly then be good.
Yeah, because you didn't spot that. You didn't spot the subtle signs of the drip that went on for 17 years. So then clearly it's your fault and you can't be good at your job. You're right, it is. And that's why a lot of people don't come forward and tell their employers and everybody else, is because they're so scared of what people think. And there's the shame aspect attached to it. You know, you've built up a career, you've built up something that you're proud of, and you don't want that to be taken away from you, all because of something that has happened to you. Something that you've been through actually then becomes something that can affect your career. And it's so wrong on so many levels.
Well, so like for me, it's having, you know, you kind of know, but you don't. So like by the time you realize that your life isn't perhaps what it's normal lives are, and I say normal very loosely, but by the time you come to that realization, you're so isolated, you're so gaslit, you know, you're brainwashed every day, so you don't know by that time whether what you're thinking, you actually think you are mad to a certain extent.
Absolutely.
You know, and we'll give the example, you know, you've told them that I've got a work meeting in London or whatever, you would have written it on the calendar, you will have shown them the letter because they want proof, you know, because you might be making it up to have an imaginary affair that they think you're having, all these kind of things. So like, and then they will brainwash you and go on and on. No, you didn't tell me that. You didn't tell me that. And then you'll get to the point where like, I don't know if I did. You know, I got a calendar in the end and I'd write on it. So like, it's on the calendar, I've written there. But even then, it would still be like, no, you're not really going where you're saying you're going.
And they're so convincing. And they're so convincing in the fact that they're convincing you that you didn't say something that you know with every part of you that you did say that. And yet in your head you're going, but okay, maybe I'm wrong. Or they'll do, or the other classic I always think is, and they say, but no, don't you remember I told you that? So they'll go somewhere, but say, no, I told you that. And you think, did you? Oh, you mustn't have been listening. And you're kind of like, well, actually, so they turn it against you sometimes. And then, you know, they were the ones that say they've told you something when they haven't. So you're thinking, maybe I am going mad. Maybe I'm not remembering things. Maybe
you start to think that. Yeah,
you do. Absolutely.
You know, like living on eggshells is exhausting. You know, like I didn't sleep for years. You know, I've got like breathing problems. So like my breathing was too loud. So if he didn't fall asleep before me and my breathing was too loud, you know, so I was almost like a cat for years, you know, because I slept with one eye open, you know, like because if my breathing was too loud, he would kick off. So like I would be scared to breathe, like fall asleep in case I was just breathing. And I don't particularly snore, but like, you know, if you can't breathe, you know, you should breathe louder than perhaps.
Of course you do, yeah. Could you not get earplugs?
Yeah, but if so that was the thing, like, and it wasn't until afterwards you realise, like, I've got chronic insomnia. It's because you're scared to go to sleep, because if you go to sleep, you're going to be woken up because you're breathing too loud. So all these little things that, like, day after day,
exhausting.
So you're just existing on, like, fumes. You don't know how you've existed. And I've said before, I remember the first day I met him, and I remember the day that I left. I remember some days in between, and more stuff's coming back to me now. But for a long time, people were like, well, you were there for 17 years, but a lot of that 17 years is like, I don't remember.
No.
And I know our brain shuts it off to protect us.
Absolutely.
So I think, and it's just because you
don't want to think about it.
You're getting through the day. So, like, towards when we first got together, it was quite early on, the first time that he hit me, but it was actually all of the controlling things that you don't realise, like, oh, I don't like you with makeup, or you look better with flat, I don't like you wearing high heels, you look better in flat shoes, oh, you look better in trousers, all of these things that at the beginning. And so, like, he was my first, I said before, like, my soulmate. Unfortunately, my soulmate was a psycho, but he was,
good title for a book, that,
Yeah.
My soulmate was a psycho.
But on many levels, he was, like, I'd never really had problems. I'd had a partner before, but not like, I thought he was the one. And I'm not a massively fairy tale, but I'm quite spiritual. So
you've invested.
I did think he was the one. And obviously, like, he had some things in his childhood that made him, I don't like the word damaged, but he had things that he'd grown up witnessing, behaviours. But I don't use that as an excuse, because I witnessed things in my childhood, and I've not gone on repeated the patterns, and he chose to take drugs, knowing that exacerbated his aggression and violence. And so at the start, it wasn't all the time. And that's when you get trapped, because if it's not all the time, to start with, then it's once, and then you might have
cyclical, it just keep
a few months or a few. So it starts off being a few months, and then it'll be a few weeks, then it'll be a few days, and then it's just every day. And then by that time, you don't really know who you are anymore. You're just existing. And if you can get through the day without something happening,
and all you ever want to do is get back. That's like trauma bonding, isn't it? All you ever want to do is get back to that point where you met and they were love bombing you. It was all wonderful. It was all great. But the reality is, you're never going to get back to that, because that didn't exist in the first place. It wasn't real. It was all a show, and it was all that individual pretending to be somebody they weren't, being a charmer, being, manipulative, being coercively, all those things. So none of it was ever real. And you're trying to constantly, as the victim or as the survivor, you're trying to constantly get back. So, well, if we just get through this other argument, if we just get through this other bad patch, then we'll get back to where we were. And it never happens. I don't know. And it may go back to it for a little while, but then it starts again. And like you say, I think we talked about this previously, you say that becomes your normal, and other people just don't understand how can that be normal. But if it's something, 17 years is a very long time, and I totally relate to that. And that's where it's difficult to explain to people. If you're going through something for 17 years, that is a very large chunk of your life. If anybody else imagined going through something for 17 years that was constantly going on, you would get into survival mode. You would just think, how, like you say, how do I get through each day? That's the facts of the matter, isn't it? That's just what it is.
And it is. You're surviving. You go to work, that's your safe space. You can be you at work. The professional you, the person that's educated. People like you or don't. I was a manager, so not everyone liked you. A leader, not everyone likes you. But you know what I mean. I had people that respected me. I had people that I could talk to on a professional level. But and it's hard if you're an empath and the person you're in love with, and then when they've done these things to you, they then start crying, or they know how to manipulate you, they know how to play on your kindness. Absolutely. They know how to work you. They know how to say, oh, well, it wasn't me, it was the drugs, or it was this, or it was that. And again, as an empath, you don't want to believe that people are fundamentally evil. You don't want to believe that. It's just not for an empath, it's really a hard struggle to believe that some people are just genuinely not very nice people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that you think you
so
can help them. You think you can help them.
You're trying to justify, but also they're telling you as well. They're telling you things. So like he would Google mental illnesses, for example. So he decided he was bipolar. So that was the reason why one day he would be okay and the next day he would be psychotic. And, you know, we went to the psychiatrist, I went with him, and the psychiatrist said that he had drug-induced psychosis. There was no underlying mental illnesses at all. You know, but he obviously had been Googling, you know, like what are the symptoms of, and decided that it wasn't him, it was an illness that was doing it.
Pass the buck, pass the blame. It's not my fault.
And, you know, so again, like we all go through traumas in childhood. I don't think there's anyone that hasn't experienced some sort of trauma, whether it's a loss of someone you love or whether it's someone being bullied, you know, bullying within your family or bullying at school. Every child goes through traumas, of course they do, and they can impact us differently. But ultimately, you know, there isn't anyone that's never suffered any sort of struggles in life, if we're honest. And so, you know, if you worked on the theory that because something bad's happened to you, that means you're going to become a bad person, then everyone would be bad. Yeah,
absolutely.
So I don't let myself believe that, you know, because we do get choices. And, you know, if we do recognise, you know, doing something like alcohol's the worst drug, you know, working in a hospital, you see the victims of alcohol induced violence more than anything, whether it's a Saturday night in A&E or whether it's, you know, partners, men who got drunk and abused women, which again, we're using women, but 95% of gender-based violence is men against women. And obviously they're physically stronger than women in most of the time. And, you know, I do acknowledge, because my best friend, he's not with us anymore, Dan, but he was in a gay partnership, and he was not the woman, but he was being abused by his partner. So it does happen in other,
absolutely,
you know, in other relationships as well. And abuse isn't always physical.
Absolutely.
And I think people don't understand that as well. So like for me, the mental abuse was far worse than any physical things that ever happened.
So many people say that, don't they?
You know, like sometimes he would stand with his fist, like literally like that close to my face for hours. And it was like, if you move. And so he had full control then, you know, to stand with your fist like that in front of someone's face for hours. And I'd be sat like literally.
Not move.
Yeah. And one incident I remember the most was with our dog. And he obviously got to the point where he knew, like, if he did things to me, it didn't really hurt. So he had his foot across her throat, windpipe, and was like, if you move, I'll like break her neck. And that was the day and he said, like, he went off to work and he's like, if you move, you know, I'll kill her. And I didn't go to work. I didn't ring in work. I literally didn't move. And people won't understand that. Like, no. I did not move from that chair. I didn't go to the loo. I didn't get any food. Me and the dog sat there because he could have come back at any time.
Absolutely.
In my mind, he could have come back at any time, or he could have been outside watching.
Of course, absolutely.
And so, like, I just didn't move, and I didn't go to work. I didn't ring in sick. You know, I just didn't go. And so that's the kind of things that people don't understand. And it's like, you know, I guess, some people might go, well, why didn't you take the dog, get in your car and go? But you haven't got anywhere to go. You don't know who are you going to go to. You know, by that point, you haven't got any friends. You haven't got anywhere to go. And that's what people don't understand is like,
and you're so
isolated, and they've told you again and again. So like, he told me that my dad said stuff about me, which most of me knew wasn't true, but he, you know, when they're dripping it in, well, even your dad says, you know, little things like, even your dad says that
even your friends think this, even your family think this about you.
So those things that drip in. And so when you are really isolated like that, you do believe, you know, there's a part of you that's like, oh, maybe they do think this about me, then who am I going to go to? And I did go in the car one night, sleep in the car all night, but I had no money and no food, and the dog needed food, and so then I had to go back. You know,
and then once you go back, the awful thing is once you go back, then they know they've got you. because you've come back, that's it. They know that you're not, that's it. She's not going to leave. She's going to stay because I've got her exactly where I want her. And whether it's threatening a pet, whether it's threatening you, whether it's threatening to harm themselves, another kind of classic, I'll kill myself if you leave.
Well, that happens as well,
Yeah.
like so on the day, so I'd been quite estranged from my mum for a long time, and then my nan died, and it was that point, I think, really, that I actually had the realization when I came back from my nan's funeral. He sort of kicked off because he said I'd been out having fun and I was back too late, and it was like, actually, I've just been to my nan's funeral, and
you're with family and friends,
and it was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon I got home at, it wasn't
not like 4 a.m.
Yeah. And I think at that point, my nan was like quite a little feisty, half Italian, and I could hear my nan's like voice going, "What the fuck are you doing with your life?" Yeah. And but that's how she would have said it, and it was
absolutely.
And it was like, it's not too late to leave. And I didn't know at that point how I was going to leave. I didn't know, but I was starting to hear this voice like, it's not too late, you can do it. Yeah. Like, you can start over.
Yeah.
But I didn't have any idea at all how. And it wasn't until a few months later when my mum came up with my niece, and the night before, so anytime you're ever doing anything, they start an argument, don't they? Because they want to upset you, they want to cause the maximum impact. So the night before, he had kicked off massively, and he said that he dumped me. He was dumping me daily, he had queues of women that wanted to be with him, all of this stuff, and I used to sit there dreaming, going, "Oh, I wish one of them would take you."
Yeah, take him off my hands.
Yeah, you'd never say it out loud, but they would be doing it to try and belittle you, like, I can have anyone I want, you're lucky, I can have anyone, that kind of thing that they drip in. And so that night he sort of kicked off, got really aggressive, violent, and he was like, "Oh, we're over." And there was, I don't know where that came from, but I was just like, "Yes, we are."
Yeah.
And then once I said those words out loud, that I'd probably been, so I think it was in the February, my nan's funeral, and it was in the April that this happened. So once I said those words out loud, it was like, right, I've said it now.
I know.
Yeah. But I still didn't know how to do it. He said that he would leave, but then he wouldn't leave. So when my mum came with my niece, and our relationship's not easy anyway, so he had assumed that I told my mum. And so he then went mental. And like we said, the whole suicide attempt. So he then he went really kicked off, and it was horrible for my niece and my mum to witness something like that, because he was like, it was pretty horrific. And then he went off and pretended to take an overdose. And again, this is something where he had a bottle of absinthe that he'd had for ages, like it's a really strong hallucinogenic alcohol thing, and he'd taken all his epilepsy tablets. And the police came and they were like, "We found a body on the railway line." So I thought he was dead. But then it turned out that he hadn't taken anything. The tests came back and there was no drugs or anything in his system. So he'd, again, taken them all out, had hundreds of blister packs of empty tablets that he had, set up to make it look like an overdose. Yeah,
to deceive you.
All set up. So the police, he was taken to hospital, he was sectioned. The police actually told me that they said, "Look, I understand it's going to be really hard, but he's asking to see you, but it's probably better if you don't."
Yeah.
Because you still love the person, even though they've done all that stuff to you.
That's something people don't understand. It's hard to switch that off. It's very
also
hard.
like, my mum was like, "Well, you'd be better off if he had died," and I was like, "Oh my god, I couldn't live with myself if someone's died because of me."
Because of you, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, kind of like, again, like my mum was very black and white to her. "Well, you'd be better off if he was dead. You wouldn't have all these problems if he was dead." But again, he was supposed to be sectioned, but within 9 hours he was out and he was coming back for me. And that's when I had to leave.
And you knew
there was no choice. And from there, and the police didn't protect me. they weren't there for me.
Not the first time I've heard that one.
He was crying, he was crying, he was brokenhearted. I'd broken his heart. I was leaving, he didn't want me to leave. The house was smashed to smithereens. But he was brokenhearted, and the two big 6-foot-old policemen were practically patting him on the back, like, oh, poor you.
Yeah.
Whereas I was just dead silent. I was, like, I don't know about you, but when you're having a traumatic experience, I tend to just like stop breathing and go completely quiet, like freeze.
Yeah.
And so he was putting on a really
great show,
Oscar-winning show. Yeah, and I just remember the police like literally stood with him and patting him on the back almost, where I was like,
that's where there's no training or understanding that that's precisely what a perpetrator would do. Spin it around, turn it around, deflect. That's what they do.
Yeah, and so he was the victim, because I had broken his heart and I was leaving, and they just they didn't, I was trying to carry some stuff out the house, and like they didn't even like offer to help me. They were like, can you just hurry up, we can't be here all day. And it was kind of like, oh, so
while you're going through all of that and your entire world is changing, wow.
Yeah, and I've heard other people say, like, I won't say the county that I lived in, but I've heard other people say about that police force as well, that they really that police force in particular just really are not good at dealing with domestic abuse.
I think a lot of the time with different services as well, I was talking about this now I think this might have been with Mark Brooks recently, and one of the things I was saying was it is like a lottery, isn't it? If you get a decent police officer, you get a decent children's services social worker, you get somebody that is actually listening and paying attention to what you're saying. It is like an absolute lottery, because you never know what you're going to get, and it should be consistent throughout. Whoever you speak to should be trained to the same levels. Go, right, okay, now I need to make notes about this. I'm going to take all the information, but they don't. They're not trained. They don't understand. They just hear it. The worst part is what's been so embedded in society. Oh, he said, she said scenario. It's a tit for tat scenario. That's just the way it is. And that's got to stop, because that is so damaging as well. It's so belittling.
I was just going to say, and I've had it from other people as well. The police often say, if there's only two of you in the house, it's your word against theirs.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we can't really prosecute because it's your word against
prove
theirs.
it. Yeah.
And so they just treat it as like a domestic dispute, which is like basically two people arguing, which isn't the case at all. So I think, again, many of the times when women think there's that moment and they can leave, when the police come and they realise that actually no one's taken them seriously, again, it reinforces the fact that you've got to stay. Because
what's the point? What's the point in saying anything?
People won't believe you. And so it just reinforces that their behaviour is okay, because the police think it's okay.
And they're not going to and that's the thing is, if they're not going to take it seriously, the people that are the ones that are going to be investigating and throughout, if you don't feel that they're taking it seriously, then why you already have an issue with trust. Your levels of trust are zero. You don't trust anybody really. So then to get into a situation where you're then supposed to trust the police or any service, and have that conversation, a lot of people, and I do think that's why a lot of victims will not necessarily go through with, if it's getting to the point where it will go to court or whatever, they don't want to do it because they won't be believed, and they think, well, what's the point? Why put myself through that hell just to find out in the end that, off they go, they're fine.
Yeah, and it's not even not being relieved, it's not being safe, because there's no protection for you. So when you're got to the point where someone's going to court, again, they're escalating their violence towards you, and that might not be physical violence, it could be emotional abuse, all the other tactics that they've got, because they know. So like, again, like we said, physical violence isn't really the worst thing that can happen to you, and I know people find that hard to understand, but you can get over a bruise, you can get over a broken bone. Those things are quicker to get over than like
what goes on.
Mental damage. And so then, like, for example, the police, he went to court, but they kind of didn't keep an address, so then he was absconded and no one knew where he was. So can you imagine those months of not knowing where he was? No one knew where he was. The police were supposedly had a warrant for his arrest, but they didn't know where he was, so they weren't.
And he can turn up, he can find out where you are, and he can turn up at any point.
So they didn't, like, they weren't looking for him. Like, it took them months between having a warrant for not attending court to, if you don't attend court, then they have a different kind of warrant, don't they, for you?
Yeah.
And it took them months to find him. And it wasn't like they didn't go to his mum's or dad's to see if he was there, although they were the obvious places. You know, when you're like, well, these are the only people he might go to, they obviously didn't check. So you're like, okay, so the people that are supposed to protect me, they're not going to protect me.
No, I've got to protect myself.
Yeah, and you don't know how to. And so
No.
you do, you know, and it's horrible that time when you're like, they're out there somewhere, they're really angry because the police are now involved.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I mean, it's very hard to say, isn't it? But like, yeah, personally, I wouldn't go to the police. Well, I won't get into that situation again in relationships because I'm not prepared to. But
you wouldn't.
But I don't think I wouldn't go to the police as a first port of call. And also, when I did have to give a statement, they wouldn't. They came to my mum's house, and they did send a female as well, but they wouldn't take my statement at my mum's house. They made me go to the police station. So I was then taken into the police station in a police car and had to give a statement. I was in there for hours. I was already, you know, just really right after. So I was already in a very kind of emotionally and mentally fragile state. So, but to be taken in a police car like you're
the criminal
in the back of the police car, like you're a criminal. Yeah. Again, that's a whole level of trauma. And then that you've given this massive statement. You know, there was hundreds of pages of texts, for example, and voice messages, and they had access to all of that stuff. They had the 999 call, you know, you could hear all the stuff, but they still failed. They didn't have enough evidence, you know. So I think I do understand why people don't want to go to police, because it's re-traumatizing yourself, because you've got to go through all of those things to then realise that actually no one's going to do anything about it anyway.
And how devastating is that? How devastating is it to think that, you know, you've got to that point where you've actually recognised that it's abuse, you want to do something about it, you know, for yourself and for other people in the future, you go down that road and you don't get the support that you need. How devastating to have to go through all that for what, you know?
And I think that, well, you know, like you just touched on, you know, you don't want it to happen to someone else.
No.
But like, he literally had moved this girl in with red hair into my house, but she was texting me telling me that she worked for the police. So then I was like, oh, has he met her when he was locked up? You know, like, did he meet someone?
And it happens.
And so she was texting going, oh, I work for the police and this and this and this. And so again, I mentioned it to the police. I was like, this girl's gave them this phone number, like, I'm getting a text from this girl who's saying that, and they didn't really do anything with it. So, you know, I don't ever know. Like, I mean, she could have worked at a police station as a cleaner. It could have been anything.
Could have been anything.
But I was getting abuse from him, and I was getting messages from this girl who was now living in my house with all my clothes and everything, and she was telling me that she worked for the police and that I was wrong as well. So, you know, I was getting extra.
So you're getting it from every angle.
Yeah. Then you've got your family that are like, well, you've left now, just forget about it. Like, literally, not even a week after, probably. It was like, you know, you've had a day, get over it.
Yeah. I mean, it's number one, I can't thank you enough for sharing all this, because I think it's so important that people see the reality, for a start. Not only that it's real human beings that are going through this, and so many people will be able to relate to exactly what you're saying, because it is so relatable on so many levels for so many people. I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, I recognize all of that. And I think, so normally when I would do this, and do the dipping out, Lucy, I normally would say, so, you know, about the hows and the whys, to think we can break down the barriers to talking about it. But I think for you, I've just thought then of a different question. And I think it's a more important question is, what, if you don't mind me asking, is what would you say, where you are now in your life and how different your life now is from where you were all those years ago, and how much you've grown in yourself and everything you've done, everything you've recognized and worked on. What is the one thing potentially you would say to somebody if they were just embarking on that, okay, I've managed to leave, and now I'm going through the process of, oh my God, I've just realized this isn't the end. This is actually just the beginning of the next stage of the abuse. What would be the one piece of advice that you would give to somebody in that situation?
So I'm a big believer I write about vicarious resilience. So I think, whoever your old tribe was, they aren't your tribe moving forwards. And it can sound a bit ruthless, but they're not. People who've not been through it, they just don't understand.
No.
They're going to judge you. So like if it's a professional level, if then whoever it is, they're going to judge you. It all comes back to that question, why didn't you just leave? And until people stop asking that question, and people start asking why didn't they just stop, then we're going to be stuck. So I think your support comes from finding other people that have been through the same thing as you, and it's seeking out, and you kind of gravitate towards each other. So I got a job in a bar, just to meet new people, because again, how do you make friends when you're in your 40s and you've got none? So I got a job in a bar, and one of the girls that worked behind there, we were just chatting, and we both realised we had been through the same thing.
Wow.
And then you form a friendship with someone who genuinely understands the fears and real whatever. So I think there are lots of groups now, and I think that came through lockdown as well. There's lots of people doing really good work, where there's groups online, where people can talk to each other either openly or anonymously, because I think that's important as well. A lot of people, I suppose for me, because I wasn't got to the point where I was practically dead anyway, I was just existing. For me, talking about it, I'm not worried about what other people think about me. I'm not worried, I'm more passionate about making sure it doesn't happen to other people.
Absolutely.
But I do understand that there's lots of people that don't want to have to deal with the shame, or they don't want people to be looking down on them and all of those kind of things. So I think it is finding, whether it's through groups, local support groups or national support groups, and you'll find that it's the same old, isn't it? It's like strangers will be the people that support you most. And it really is true. People that don't know you, people that you've never met before, you'll find those will be your biggest supporters, and those will be the people that care, like genuinely care, like, are you okay? Like, and I suppose it's a bit like with being ill, like after the first week, people get bored and they're like, don't ask the question anymore.
Do you know what? Oh, that's the one thing I keep coming back to time and time again. And in the beginning, when I started doing these podcasts, I thought, you know what, I shouldn't really say this. Now I don't give a monkeys because it's mine. I can do what I like. But one thing I always say is that drives me insane is society seems to assume that, like you say, domestic abuse, it's like, it's not having a cold. You don't recover like overnight, weeks, months, years, like I was saying before. It isn't something to get over. It isn't a cold. It isn't the flu. It is something that is so much deeper than that, that you need to surround yourself, like you say, with people that understand and are like-minded. And that needs to progress into every area, whether it's contacting the police, whether it's contacting social services or your GP or whoever. And having those support groups at the moment are absolutely vital to that understanding. And that's why, obviously, I want to do this, because I want as many people as possible to be able to share experiences, share their knowledge, so that anybody can go back and watch these or read the guest blogs or whatever and think, oh my God, I'm not on my own. And that's the whole reason I started out, was because I thought, as much as you have people around you, you are essentially, when you put your head on that pillow at night, you're on your own. And you should never feel like you haven't got that support network out there, because there's so many people ready and willing to support and be there. You just have to know where to look, don't you? Really?
Yeah, and that's the thing, you don't know where to look, because you don't realise, like we said about it being normal, when I was growing up, there were patterns of gaslight, different behaviours that I grew up with, that happened in my house growing up. So then I didn't question those behaviours. So it's not about not being educated, or it's like doing a degree and doing medicine or pharmacy or whatever, or any other thing that you've done. It's not about that, because those are things that you learn. But the behaviours that patterns of behaviours that when you're growing up that you just see, you then, as an adult, you think, well, that's how all relationships are, that's how all families are. You don't realise that Joe's not down the road has got a completely different life to you. You think that's how every family is.
How it is. How it's got to be.
We do sorry, my dog's just making funny noises. And NLP coaching, I did coaching and NLP, and are those things we learn mostly in our first 7 years of life. And then in cycles. So then the next, so like when you're 1 to 7 or 0 to 7, whatever, you're learning those things, and then your sort of pre-teen years, you're again reinforcing those things. So if you grow up and you see that as normal, then when you have your first relationship, it's you think that's just what relationships are.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter your work, and that's the sad thing, isn't it? Because at work that you wouldn't let someone talk to you like that.
But in an emotional relationship sort of setting, you do, because that's what you think of as normal, and that's how people behave.
And again, you said earlier about, I guess, and some of the things they start off as sort of like a jokey. Some of the gaslighting starts as jokey, doesn't it? So it's a bit like, oh, so they laugh, and then that joke suddenly becomes a real thing, so that's another way they can sort of get into your head and like
absolutely.
And I think I was speaking to other people about it, and things like how you wear your hair, etc. When you've just met someone, you don't realize that those are that is gaslighting. What gaslighting is, you don't learn about these things. They're not spoken about, so you don't realize the traditional picture of domestic abuse in the old films and things that I grew up with was someone comes home from the pub drunk on a Sunday, their dinner's not cooked, so they beat their wife up,
and that's that.
And that was the kind of picture of what domestic abuse looked like,
and that's the picture we've got to change.
And so again, when you're in that situation, you think, oh well, he hasn't hit me, so is it abuse? That's a thing I hear from a lot of people, where they never hit me. And so they don't. Again,
is it still abuse if my partner doesn't hit me? There's a guest blog on that.
So there's those kind of questions. So again, they're all reinforcing the behaviours of the abuser, because it's socially acceptable in a way.
Because that's how it's always been.
And it will be, unless we talk out about it. And I think I did like the qualification on domestic abuse, understanding domestic abuse, just because I wanted a broader perspective than my own, because we can all have been through the same thing, but it affects us all differently. And I'm a big believer of that. Like, although we can bond through trauma and have the vicarious resilience, but everyone's experience and how they react to it is different.
It's unique to them. Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
I think and one of the things we in that course was that the laws changed during lockdown, that it's part of the syllabus for 16 to 17-year-olds to talk about it. But by that point it's too late.
Absolutely.
And most people have had a relationship of some sort by the time they're like 12 or 13. You had your first love. You probably say love, but you think it's love, don't you?
Of course you do.
The guy in there 3 years older than you, who's really gorgeous, you think you're in love, or you got a pop star, whatever. But so 16 to 17 is too late to start having those conversations. And we can talk about, we don't have to be hardcore and talk about abuse, but we can talk about patterns of behaviours that are
with much younger children as well. Much younger.
At primary school, we can talk about limiting beliefs. What is it our mum or our nan has told us that they're inherited, that then becomes a limiting belief for you, which starts to bring in imposter syndrome, especially in girls, like I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, or girls can't do this, or women should be seen and not heard. All of these kind of limiting beliefs that are like, it's got to change. If we so while we might not talk about abuse directly, we can talk about patterns that lead to you thinking abuse is possible. So we can teach boundaries, like
100%.
A person, if your teacher's always putting you down, or if your classmates are bullying you, we can teach people how to know that it's wrong, and how to deal with them, and have a person. So again, if you've been bullied as a child, you might then end up in an abusive relationship.
Absolutely, because it's, again, go back to being normal. I mean, can we start a campaign with the government now getting this on the curriculum for much younger children? And the thing is, what annoys me is something I'm really passionate about, because I think having children myself is you know, people will say, well, you can't talk to children about domestic abuse. How many children statistically in a classroom will be going through that at home, experiencing it at home? Quite a few. And if they don't know that that behavior is wrong, that behavior is then learned at home, that learned behavior carries on through school. And like you say, by 16, 17, it's far too late then to be talking about healthy relationships and everything else. Children need to be learning at a much younger age. If we're going to change the status quo, if we're going to change the future, then you have to start with the children now who are like, you know, the grassroots of it, saying, actually, this isn't normal behavior when somebody does this. This isn't acceptable just because somebody says, I love you, I'm sorry, then you accept it and you move on. No, you don't have to accept it. You know, it is unacceptable behavior. And until we can start to actually own it and say, yeah, this isn't acceptable, and we need to talk about it on a much bigger level, but it doesn't have to be scary to children. Like you say, it can be done in a way where we talk about, like you say, beliefs, where you can talk about boundaries. To me, that really is such a big part of how things could change in the future. And yeah, let's start now. Let's start.
Yeah, I'd love to say in healthcare, when there was campaigns, you know, government-led campaigns, one of the ways of getting those filtered out was by having a champion, you know, like, so you'd have a nurse, say like when infection control became a big thing, you'd have an infection control nurse in every hospital. So that's your champion for that cause.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we could have we need to have a champion in every school, primary school, who is a go-to person. So when children recognise, and it can be bullying at home, bullying at school, it can be just and we need to recognise that bullying, again, isn't just someone breaking your glasses and stamping on. It is repeatedly saying things that make you feel less of a good person.
Yeah, make you feel lesser than you should ever do when you're a young child and you've got everything in front of you. You've got every possibility lying ahead of you. And, you know, you've got a parent at home calling the child every name under the sun, and you're stupid and you're this and you're that. Well, unfortunately, one of the things I always say is, the bad stuff is easier to believe. It's so much easier if somebody says 20 nice things and then they say one horrible thing, you're going to focus on the one horrible thing. If it's things about you, we do that as human beings. We can't help ourselves. We want to try and be perfect, so we focus on the negatives. And if children are experiencing that, then how, you know, that's something that has to change.
And it's in a certain age of children, they might not be conscious that what they're saying is like, we've all probably been that child that was horrible to another child without being malicious. We've all been there where we might have said something that could then have affected someone for the rest of their life without realizing. So it's about all children recognizing that there are, and I think we've lost those values and things, haven't we? You know, like, I think maybe when my nan was at school, you know, during the war and things, they were all about values, weren't they? They were all about things. And I think as we've gone on, people are more attached to their phones. I think those kind of values, even basic manners like please and thank you, you know, like youngsters giving the old person the seat on the bus, you know, you don't see all of that kind of stuff anymore.
It's an assumption, isn't it? It's an assumption. There's very much I think a belief with the younger generation now of a sense of entitlement. You know, I'm entitled to that seat, I'm entitled to, you know, they've been brought up with a sense of entitlement, and that's scary, because absolutely not. You know, we all have to find our place, and none of us are entitled to anything. We're all here, we all come out, you know, and we're here and we all leave. So nobody's any better than anybody else, but that sense of entitlement that goes on is something that's going to be very difficult to build in with that conversation about domestic abuse, because so many children think, well, that won't happen to me, I'm absolutely fine, you know. And I could go on for hours. I could.
No, that's another myth, isn't it? You know, it won't happen to me. When people say things like that, it's like, is there anyone ever that intended that to be their life? No,
exactly. And that stigma of assuming there is a particular type of person that fits into a box that says you are somebody that is going to be abused. That's got to change as well, because it is not just limited to a specific type of person. It can happen to anyone, and that's something that really infuriates me, is this image that we have of what a domestic abuse victim survivor looks like, and there isn't one. It should just be an empty box, because literally it could be anything and anyone.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the statistics, like I try and point that out as well. So if it's like 1 in 4 people are experiencing domestic abuse, that could be a male or female, but it's more likely to be a female. But if you think of that, if you're in a room of 20 people, then a quarter of those people
absolutely
are suffering some sort of abuse. And I think so when you put it into that perspective, if you work in a big department, for example, there is going to be a percentage of people that you work with that are struggling at home. So I think it's really important to, for example, in my case, when I was a manager, is when people's performance starts to dip or their sickness increases, that we sort of dig a bit deeper. So if someone's always been really good at their job and then suddenly things start to change, is but to have a little awareness. And that's the same with teaching as well. If you've got a child who was great and then suddenly start to play up, is to dig a little bit deeper before writing them off as not being any good. To just ask the question. It is, you know, what's going on, what's causing this change.
Absolutely. I have, do you know what? I am so grateful to you, because I think we could go on for hours and we could cover a hell of a lot more. And I think we're going to have to do episode, whatever I'm on now, 5 or 6, we're going to have to do a whole other one because we could carry on. But honestly, thank you so much, because it's absolutely amazing. And for sharing, you know, I know people always say thank you for sharing, but it's so important. And I think when you're sharing experiences that are so personal like that, then it is a huge thing, because there will be people that will be able to relate to what you've said on so many levels, and also for family and friends to realize that they haven't got all the answers, and maybe they need to look at how they react and how they, you know, support their family and, you know, members of staff or whoever that are going through abuse. They need to recognize
that's something again that we can teach people, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We can't stop people being abusers. Well, we can try at a lower level change behaviours, but for people that are in abusive situations now, we can't stop that. We can't change that person, but we can change people's perceptions, and we can educate people on how to support people.
And that's going to be the next step, isn't it?
I think that's what we can do, and I think we have to focus on those things that we can do rather than what we can't change.
We can't change. Focus on what we can change, not what we can't. I love it. I love it.
I think, you know, by speaking, by sharing our truth, you know, and again, you know, my ex, if he's listening to this, he'll be like, that's she's, you know,
talking rubbish or whatever they come up with.
Is as well acknowledging that it's your truth. And don't be pushed by people to fit into a box. Again, you know, don't fit into a box just because people find it uncomfortable. If they find what you're saying uncomfortable, then
there's a reason for it.
And I like it with my sister, you know, part of me was like, I'm kind of grateful she doesn't understand, because if she did, it would mean she'd gone through the same thing.
Yes, absolutely. And
you know, part of me is like, I'm really glad that she doesn't really understand this, because if she understood, she would have been through it. And so I'm grateful that she has. That's not the case. And I think I try to look at it with everyone like that, you know. People are like judgy or whatever. It's kind of about, I'm grateful that you didn't go through that, because you would have a different perspective if you did.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time this morning. I'm very grateful, and I've got a feeling we might be doing another one at some point.
And I'll write you some blogs. Like I said, I'm going to talk about the one we touched it earlier, but this whole new phrase about trauma dumping, because I think there's lots of things that we
do a whole other one on that.
So I'll write a blog for you about that. But thanks. Thank you. Good luck with the podcast, and I will share it obviously with my people.
Thank you.
I'll share it with people and my not people as well. I'll just share it. And I think we need to talk about it, and we need to like change the conversation. So
absolutely, 100%. Thank you so much, Rach. Thank you for taking the time, and I'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.